Welcome to this training video on how to do an FMC setup in the simulator for your type ratings. This is documenting the fully manual entry setup because the simulator doesn't have ACARS available. That said, there are aircraft running around the fleet that also don't have ACARS, so you use the same procedure there. Sitting on the screen in front of you on the right, you can see the FMC pretty much ready to go. Over on the far left is my documentation for manual FMC initialization non-ACARS. It is FCOMP compliant, but things are in a slightly different order. I've got them in what I consider to be a logical sequence and also just ticking off some items that I check when I'm doing an FMC setup. Sitting in the middle at the bottom is the TODC takeoff data card. If you haven't seen one of these, it means you haven't reached your OCC ground school yet. You'll do a few of these on the OCC ground school and you'll be doing them regularly throughout the rest of the sim training. And if you're anything like me, you will be making the odd mistake as you go and learning from them. Top middle is page 5 of the flight plan that we're using today. This page is entirely designed to have every piece of information that you need for an FMC setup so you don't have to go hunting around the flight plan. All right, with all the information in front of us, let's get going. This procedure comes into play after we've done the preliminary pre-flight flow. At the bottom of that preliminary pre-flight flow, it tells you to catch the ATIS and also calculate your performance. What's slightly missing out of that is just a discussion between the captain and the first officer after a review of the flight plan, the weather and the NOTAMs to decide a fuel. So having decided what fuel you're going to take today, you'll write that on the TODC. You'll grab your zero fuel weight and bring that down here as well. That'll allow you to calculate a gross weight. Hopefully I've got that right. I have. We add a ton to that, and so today that comes up with 63.9. Now that we've got a weight, the next thing to do is to copy down the ATIS. So here's my ATIS, Melbourne, information Alpha runway 27 for departure, 300 at 12, but you'll notice in the OPT wind area here I've written 0, and that's pretty standard. We'll ignore basically all headwinds, and if we have a little bit of tail, we tend to round it up to the -5, -10, whatever's a bit conservative. Visibility 3,000 light showers and rain, but it is a dry runway today, some scattered and broken cloud. 15 degrees. But up here in the temperature that I use for OPT, you'll note that I've added 2 degrees. Again, that's standard practice as long as we're outside of icing conditions. QNH 1013. So the ton we add to the weight, being conservative on the wind, and also the 2 degree increment we usually use on temperature, is all about basically increasing the margin that we hedge against the likelihood of conditions changing on taxi out and having to recalculate performance on the run, which is just something we're really trying to avoid because it can be quite a risk challenge to manage. So having got all that information together, the next thing we need to do is calculate an OPT. Speaking of an OPT calculation, here's one here for our departure today. First and foremost, the aircraft Yankee India, Yankee India Yankee. So I managed to get that right. Melbourne 27 dry. The wind is calm as we decided. 17 degrees with the increment 1013. 63.9 tons. That's correct. We're going to go for TO1, hopefully. Flap 5 auto on the packs. Engine any ice off. No improved climb 19 degrees. These are all pretty standard settings. Calculate. It's giving me an assumed temperature solution. So we've got the engine acceleration heights here, thrust settings, speeds, and the engine out procedure. Basically, we've completed the OPT. The mission now is to get this information accurately onto the takeoff data card without making too many transcription errors. This will obviously be cross-checked independently by the other pilot, including the ATIS and the OPT calculation and what gets written on the card later on in the departure sequence. At this point, with the OPT calculated, a flight plan in front of us, and everything ready to go, we're now ready to actually get into the FMC setup procedure, so let's do that. So the CDU setup procedure actually does start here on the IDENT page, but sometimes when you walk into the aircraft, well, this is what you get when it's been powered up, but sometimes when you walk into the aircraft, you'll see a different page sitting there left by the previous crew or just where it happens to be. So you need to know how to manipulate these buttons to get to the page you need to. Two things I want to point out is that many of these pages have many of these buttons take you to a page that has multiple pages. For example, the progress button has 4 pages, and you sort of next page your way through, forwards or backwards, and you can actually loop right around. But this INIT ref button, which is initialization and reference, which is where we're going to start, is a different beast. So when you click this button, it takes you to the page which it thinks you need to see. So here in pre-flight, where I haven't completed the pre-flight, it's taken me here with lots of empty boxes. In flight, it would take me to the approach page, for example, to set up for a flap and VREF. It's actually not helping me out here because I actually want to go to the IDENT page. But apart from the fact that this init ref performance has multiple pages, in fact, the init ref button itself has multiple pages and sections hanging off it. So you go to the index prompt, and now you can see that this single init ref button has multiple different types of pages coming off it. We want to start at the ident page, and off we go. All right, CDU setup as documented over here. First thing to check is the model number. There it is, 737W.1, 26K rated engines. Today happens to be the 22nd of June, so the database is just ticked over and it's current. And that's pretty much we need on this page. I'm going to use this button over here. This is called a line select key, and this is number 6 right. So 1 left, 2 left, 3 left, and all the way down here is 6 right. And the way the FMC is designed, for the most part, you just keep hitting 6 right and filling in the empty boxes that you see until you run out of places to go, and you've mostly done the setup. So it'll be 6 right pretty much all the way through. So the next button, 6 right, is POS INIT. Let's head over to that. All right, so here we are on POS INIT, position initialization page, and that may be a clue. The reason we're here is basically to give the IRSs an initial position for alignment. When you come to one of these pages and you see the angry square boxes there, that's stuff that basically has to be entered in order to continue through the setup. Sometimes you'll see dashed lines like that, which means there's optional information. We could enter the airport in there, which would then allow us to enter the gate, which would give us a position that we could use to align the IRSs. That's pretty old world. We're going to use the GPS, which is on the second page. Line select the GPS into the scratch pad, go back to the first page, stick it in there, and now in the background the IRSs will be aligning, and once they're all sorted, that position box will just disappear like you see that. And that's pretty much it. Oh, well, I should actually say we do actually check the GMT. If I go back and look at my procedure, we do check the GMT date and time to make sure they're accurate. They're coming from the GPS, not really sure why they wouldn't be unless it was somehow GPS failed or deselected something. Anyway, POS INIT page done. The prompt is taking me, 6 right is taking me to the root prompt. Root page, sorry, is worth noting that the root page is actually not one of the init ref pages, so the flow is taking us out of initialization reference into the root. But it will take us back into initialization once we've done this. So let's go to the root page. And here we are on the root page, completely empty and ready to go. If I look over here at the flight plan, I can see that this flight plan that we're doing today, Melbourne to Sydney, comes with a company route, so that'll be the fast way to type the information in. So I just copy that from the flight plan. And all I have to do is enter it in the company route box up here, and it'll fill in for me origin, destination, and the route. Or at least it would if we were in the simulator or in the aircraft. But unfortunately, the FMC emulator doesn't have any company routes, so I can't use those. Clear the scratch pad out. Now I have to do a manual, completely manual entry. So I need an origin and a destination. They're over here. So Melbourne to Sydney. ICAO entries always. I need a flight number, VOZ813. Don't make the mistake of using a 0 instead of a letter O. Ask me how I know this doesn't work. Okay, and then finally we need a runway. We put the runway in now because shortly we're also going to type all the performance information in, and if we were to put the runway in after that, or even change the runway, then we'll drop half of our performance entries. We were planning on 27, so let's put 27 in there. And this page is basically done, but what we haven't got is an actual route. So let's put that in next on page 2. The route strip is up here. It's Melbourne, runway 27, Docel 1, that's our SID to go to Docel, Yankee 59 to get to Rivet, and then the Star Rivet 3 arrival into Sydney on runway 16 right. So the route part is from Docel. Kept I put it in the wrong place, you fool. Okay, I put it over there where it belongs. So, because it's a waypoint, you need 2. The airways go on the left and the waypoints go on the right. What we might see up later on here is the SID, but for the moment, Docel, Yankee 59, and missed it, and that finishes at Rivet. there, and that looks to be it. Directed docel, Yankee 5-9 to rivet, and we're done. On a longer flight, this would continue the same way from rivet and another airway to another waypoint, another airway to another waypoint, etc. until we've got it all in. Doesn't have to be airways. You can actually have direct from waypoint to waypoint. So if the flight plan said after rivet we go direct to Banda, then we'd put Banda over here, and now we'd have direct Banda. We'll delete that because that's not what we're doing today. It's matching. I could actually activate from here, but I'll just pop into back to the first page and activate it there. Notice that it's cyan up the top. That's what an inactive route looks like. If we had a nav display in front of us, that would also show a cyan route to Sydney. Let's activate it and execute it. And now it says active route 1. So on the nav display would be a magenta line, and there'd be an active magenta waypoint as well. I always stop here and do a route copy just so that I've got a pristine copy sitting in route 2. That's personal technique. And now this page is basically done. 6 right, once again, is telling us where to go next. It's PERF INIT, which of course is back in the initialization pages. Let's head over there. So PERF INIT, performance initialization, huge number of empty boxes on this screen, all of which had to be filled. Me personally, I started at the bottom left and just worked my way up and across and down. That seems to work logically and doesn't fall into some of the traps that come with this page. We need the cost index first. That's a 9. It's a nice low cost index. If we had a high cost index, like a 40 or a 50, then I'd make a mental note just to check climb, cruise, and descent speeds to make sure they weren't too high. Reserves, looks like 1.1. Round up as usual. Zero fuel weight, that was 56.9. And as I do this, just note here that as I fill the zero fuel weight in, it adds the fuel, which it's sensing from the fuel quantity system and giving a gross weight. You'll notice that this all matches out here to what we worked out on the TODC, but of course, typically at this point during a pre-flight, we may not have finished refueling, so we may have less fuel than planned, and so the calculation may not work. But we don't use this planned one to predict fuel on board. We just stay with the FQIS and check it after refueling later on. All right, heading across to the cruise altitude, we need 390. Let's toss that up in the top right. Now it's asking me for cruise wind and an ISO deviation top of climb. So cruise wind 256 at 91. It does say top of climb wind, and that's actually what it is, but we enter that as a cruise wind. And what that actually does is it propagates that wind all the way through the legs page waypoints at a fixed level. ISO deviation minus, sorry, not ISO deviation, top of climb temperature minus 48 up there, which is used for predicting altitude capability. And now I've got to check the transition altitude 10,000. That should be the default, and that's there. Always try and execute the page after you've done it rather than going to further pages. And this page is basically done. That said, I will just chat about the cruise wind for a moment. If I was in the aircraft and I had this cruise wind showing on the flight plan, I would absolutely type it in, because particularly with a wind like that, because A, it's the SOP, and B, it gives me more accurate fuel and time prediction. However, if I was in the simulator, I might just turn my head back to the instructor and say, did you want me to type the wind in? Are you putting a wind back there in the iOS? Because if I put 90 knots of wind in here and he puts no wind in the iOS, then it's going to be a bit of a mess in flight, and particularly with descent forecast winds, your VNAV path will be calculated based on an idle thrust descent with the winds that the FMC thinks are there on descent, and if there's nothing in the iOS station at the back, it can get very messy. Just a note about the winds. Other than that, this is ready to go. Once again, our trusty 6 right button is telling us what's next, N1 limit, and once again, that's out of the init ref area and over to here. Off we go. Into the N1 limit page now, which is all about setting in the parameters that calculate thrust for N1 for the oil throttle and display on the upper screen. So we start at the top left. It needs to know if we're going to use a selected temperature, what that is, and most importantly, it wants to know the ambient temperature that we're using. The OPT solution gave me a selected temperature of 50, and remember we were working on 17. So 50 over 17. So that's done. You'll notice here that by default it's selected a 26K full TO thrust, with a selected temperature D rate of 50 degrees, of course. But over here on the card, we wanted a 24, which is TO1, so we'll select a 24K D rate. So now everything should be matching up. We've got a TO1 24K takeoff or 50 over 17 to give 90.3% N1, and we clearly have a problem. If I had something like this in the aircraft or the simulator, I'd have to stop and actually work out what I'd done wrong. But in this case, I know the FMS emulator is not calculating it correctly. You can see really small variations, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4% when you have rounding, or if you've got packs on or off, and that's not how you're planning on doing the takeoff, so the computer can't quite work out what's going on. But a big discrepancy like this is a problem, and it's a problem in the emulator, not with anything we've done. So when I say I've got a TO1 50 over 17 90.3, I'm comparing to the card. I'm also having a quick look up at the upper engine display at the M1 gauges just to see that those values are reflected there as well. So the FMC is talking to the thrust computer. And note to self, we're going to get climb 1 for takeoff. If there was something demanding on the SID, I might later on think about coming back and making it climb. End of the N1 limit page, you can see 6 riders taking us to the takeoff page, which is back in the INIT ref area. Off we go. So here we are on the takeoff reference page, once again under the INIT ref button again. And right away I'm going to break the standard paradigm, and instead of fixing the boxes here, I'm popping straight into the next page because we want to sort the acceleration heights. We'll start with the engine out acceleration height. You can see that's defaulting to 1,000 feet here. And if we look over on the OPT solution recorded on our TODC, indeed it is 1,000 feet, so they match. So basically I'm done. The other two heights we need to look at are the oil engine acceleration height and the thrust reduction height, which are basically driven by noise abatement or the lack thereof. Today, noise abatement is standard. So that's our standard departure, 1,000, 1,000. You can see that reflected on the diagram from my other notes here. If this was a noise abatement 1 departure, then it would still be climb thrust reduction at 1,000 feet, but instead we'd accelerate at 3,000 feet above the airfield nominally. If this was noise abatement 2, we would leave 1,000, 1,000, but we don't use VNAV for noise abatement 2, so the climb thrust reduction would still happen from the FMC, but the acceleration we do manually at 1,000 feet and then obviously maintain up speed to 3,000 after that. Finally, even on a standard noise or a noise abatement, occasionally we modify these values to something higher, typically because of the demands of the SID. Either we want to maintain higher thrust for longer, or we want to accelerate at a higher altitude to ensure some SID compliance, airspace compliance, that kind of stuff. But basically now this page is done. So we need to pop back to the page we skipped over and look at takeoff reference page 1. This one's pretty straightforward. Start with the boxes, flap 5. I'll stick that in now. Then we need the speeds over here on the right. I'll resist the impulse to say them out loud as I type them, because when I play the video back, it looks stupid. Okay, flap 5, 137, 140, and then this page is basically done. Problem now, you'll notice, I should mention that while the runway is here, there is the option in the FMC to put an intersection. So in Melbourne, that would be 34 Juliet. We do not use this feature. We always leave this to the full length of the runway. Right, with this page done, what you'll notice is we are missing our 6 right prompt. And that's because as far as the FMC is concerned, we've done all we need to do. And that's a reasonable argument, but our procedure goes on and takes care of a few other things and checks a few more things. So how do I do that? Well, basically I go for the major selection keys, start at the top left, work across to the right, and I don't do the ones that we never use. And obviously if I've already done a certain button like the root button, then I skip across that and keep going. So from that point of view, INIT ref we've done, route page we've done, departures, arrivals we don't use until we get the airways clearance, and after that we'll select it as part of that. So that's not a button we're using now. The ATC and the FMC COM are about CPDLC and uplinking, so that's not us, but the VNAV button. We need to go and sort out our VNAV pages, so let's head over that way now. Okay, so the VNAV button has brought us to the VNAV climb page, currently in econ mode. What are we looking for here? Well, mainly it's all about the climb speed and the speed restriction on the way out. Starting at the bottom up, we need to see 250 below 10. Occasionally you'll see something else driven by the SID. But in this case, we want 250 below 10. We've got 250 below 10. We're happy. The climb speed, however, I can't quite work out why it's trying to climb so quickly. The cost index is 9. That's nice and low. Maybe it's got something to do with that really strong wind, but it could also just be this FMS emulator. In any case, I'm going to have to fix that. Might discuss this with the other crew member first, or you might just do it and then advise the other crew member. But in any case, let's assume we do want to go up quickly for some reason. So we'll bob it up to something a little better than that and make it 310 at 7.8 and take the edge off that climb. And that's it for the climb page. You'll notice Econ's dropped out now. We're doing a 310 knot climb, a 310 knot 7 climb. I won't begin. Oh, 7.8, that's what that is. Anyway, we're now on our way up to 390 at a better speed, 250 below 10. Off to the cruise page via the next page key. This is an Econ cruise, the 390, and what we're looking for here is altitude capability. So 390, optimum is 389. That's okay. It's pretty high, but that's okay. We would not go above 1,000 feet above optimum, or maximum is the absolute, so the lower of those two limits, 1,000 feet above optimum or maximum. So 390 is okay for us today. 794, on the other hand, is probably a bit fast to start off with. Once again, assuming for some reason we're trying to go fast, we'll just bump this back to something more reasonable. 7.8. Both those climb speeds and this cruise speed would be in smooth air, and maybe when we get up there we might even take it up a little faster than that. But for the moment, here we are, 390, 7.8. Once again, I've lost Econ because I've hardened up the cruise speed, but not much we can do about that. Okay, now we're onto the descent page. Here we are on the descent page. This is also an Econ. We always modify this. So first of all, 250 below 10 is pretty much what we do all the time, unless there's some other reason to do something different. And then finally, once again, even though 321 is too fast, we will always change it to 280 unless we're doing some kind of high-speed descent by ATC. So 280 is the AIP agreed, 280 plus or minus 20 knots. Cruise Mac into 280 plus or minus 20 knots is the agreed AIP ATC descent speed, and then 250 below 10 is standard. So that's the descent page done. Now we head across to the forecast page here. Firstly, we want to see level 110 up there. If we were going to New Zealand, it'd be something different, US different again, but for all of Australia, obviously it's level 110, that's fine. Slight difference, our FMC does not have the QNH as mandatory. The QNH is used to ease the transition of the VNAV path through the transition level on the way down. What we do is a developing technique which is used by a lot of crew is when you do your weather preparation, decide your fuel, you'll have a look at the forecast QNH for your destination, which I noticed for our arrival in Sydney, an hour and a half from now, is 1015, and you'll stick that in there. And later on, when we get the ATIS, we'll verify that. And it serves a dual purpose of having a QNH that's reasonable for our VNAV path calculation, plus we've got an independent cross-check of the QNH we're being given on the ATIS or by ATC. Moving on, we're now looking at the descent winds. That's from over here on the flight plan. So let's throw some levels in there. We'll start with 340. Obviously, if we were cruising a lot lower, we might choose a lower level to start with, but 340 is going to work for us today, 240 and 180. And why did I choose those speeds? To be honest, because this is what ACARS uplinks when we uplink the winds automatically. There is a discussion to be had about what wind to use at the bottom. If you have a star that leads into an approach, and towards the end of that star and transitioning onto the approach, you're going to experience quite a lot of tailwind. Might be worth putting a lower level wind and a tailwind that reflects what's forecast, so that VNAV has a better chance of managing the speed transition from 250 knots back to upspeed without leaving you high and fast. In any case, let's finish off these winds. 340 to 56 at, oh God, I'm saying the numbers as I type them. And 54. And did I get that right? I did. No, I didn't get it. Yes, 244 at 31. Okay. And that's a change, so I'll execute that while I'm here. So this page is basically done, but I will point out that once again, particularly here, if you have these wins in your simulator setup and your instructor doesn't have these wins in his iOS station at the back, and typically as an instructor we usually don't put wins into the simulator, you'll have a real mismatch. And if this is a headwind or a tailwind going down descent, then VNAV path is really going to struggle to keep you on speed while it's trying to maintain path, and you'll get a lot of either underpath or overpath energy management issues. So just check with your instructor whether he wants you to put these wins in. All right, so that looks like we're done with the VNAV button altogether. Left to right, we want to go now onto the fix page. All right, here we are on the fix page. It feels like this has been going on forever. You're not the only one, but we're nearly there. Fix page. Page 1 we tend to use for the single engine failure procedure, or if there isn't one, terrain awareness on departure. So let's have a quick look back at the OPT, because we don't write the procedure on the card, and you'll see that we have a single engine failure procedure off runway 27 in Melbourne. It's track 263, which sounds like straight ahead, out to 11 DME Melbourne, then a left turn, track 180. Okay, so that means I probably need Melbourne VOR on the fix page as a reference. There's the VOR. I needed an 11-mile range ring, so /11 for the distance, and we always put a 25-mile ring around it just for MSA awareness as well. That page is basically done. At this point, I'd actually probably also stop and just make sure I've got Melbourne tuned on both VORs and showing up on the nav display, since we're going to be using the DME for awareness for the single engine failure procedure. That's page 1. What do we do with fix page 2? If we pop back to our OPT for a moment, we can see that apart from the single engine failure procedure, this one also has an after initial turn procedure to track direct to VSAS, climb to MSA, and then accelerate. So AIT kicks in if you've turned off the SID/SEFP and then suffer the engine failure. So after initial turn, track direct to VSAS, climb to MSA. So that tells me I probably should stick VSAS on the fix page, so we've got a bit of a reference. Doesn't need a range ring, and that should be it. If there wasn't a use for this page in relation to the single engine failure procedure, then we would stick the initial approach fix for the most likely runway to come back on. That is 3-4 in Melbourne today, so I think it's ACDEL at the beginning of the RNAV, or if I was in a GLS aeroplane, whatever that initial approach fix is out there before the GLS on 3-4. Finally, the other option is I have seen guys put the destination in there with a 200-mile range ring, which just tends to warn everybody that it's time to get ready for the descent at the other end. In any case, that's the fix page. We're on to the legs page next. Continuing our setup with the legs page, we're in the home stretch now. We don't check tracks and distances and waypoints and stuff. We've entered a valid route, or we've uplinked a procedure, or we've used a company route. That's not a requirement. That said, if you are using latitude and longitude waypoints, there is a requirement to verify track and distance, but it just doesn't seem to happen anywhere we go these days. In any case, the main thing on this page is I just want to check RNP1. If we were flying an RNP1 SID today, I would absolutely have to see that there. Or if there was some other a more stringent requirement for RNP, that's pretty standard for us anyway, but we just pop in here and check it. It also should be showing on the bottom of the ND. The other thing we do is come in here into route data. This is where the cruise winds are. You can see here on the flight plan, the dark box here is our planned level winds. If it was a longer flight plan, there might be a step altitude and a shift in the box to show, well, the box actually remains the same, the levels shift. But in any case, here's my 390 winds. Ebony, I need to see 256 at 91. That was my top of climb. That's interesting. It's not showing that. So let's put that into 56 at 91. It probably doesn't think we're going to be level at Ebony, but that's done. Aaron, 256 at 95. Not up to 56 at 95 as well. I should be able to select that, but no, I can't. And that's all the waypoints I have at 390. Let's execute that as well. Once again, a reminder, if you're in the sim and the sim doesn't have these winds, then you probably shouldn't put them in here. All right, so that's the legs page done. We don't do holding while we're sitting on pre-flight. As I mentioned, these two buttons aren't used for us. And so now we're off to the progress page, which, good news, this is the last one. So the final page in our FMC setup is the progress page, which is fitting because what we're doing here is we're looking at the distance to destination as opposed to what the flight plan's got. You'll always see a discrepancy, and the flight plan should always be longer because it has the SID and the star, whereas this thing is a direct line. And if you do have your fuel on board like we do today, you can see 4.3, and you would have identified a fuel over destination in your pre-flight planning, which is why you loaded to 6 tons, and that should be something similar, understanding that the FMC tends to overestimate. Again, no SID, no star. And that's basically the end of the procedure. Thanks for sticking with me.